You know how the past, no matter how long ago, has a way of sneaking back into your life at the very moment you think it's gone for good? How memories you've tucked into the quiet corners of your heart suddenly find their way to your doorstep when you're least prepared. That's exactly what happened to me, and what unfolded in the still, velvety hours of midnight, when the world felt hushed and watching, still leaves me trembling and breathless to recall. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and as of today I am 61 years old. For the last 7 years, I have been living entirely on my own, tucked away in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood in Northern Virginia. My 2 children, now fully grown, have their own lives. My son chasing his ambitious career under the glittering lights of Los Angeles. My daughter raising her beautiful family in Boston. I had convinced myself that after losing my husband David to illness, I had managed to build a peaceful, self-contained life. My days became predictable, almost ritualistic. Mornings began with hot tea steaming in my favorite chipped mug. Afternoons were reserved for long hours curled up with books whose worlds I could disappear into. Evenings passed in a silence I had taught myself to accept, sometimes even to admire. A silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. I believed this was contentment. Truly, I believed surprises were no longer a part of my story. But then last weekend came, and everything I thought I knew about myself shifted. The rain that evening fell hard, a steady sheet of silver against my windows, like the world itself was trying to wash something clean. It was against this backdrop that I heard a knock at my door, a sound so out of place it startled me upright. Standing there on my front step, soaked by the storm but unmistakably familiar, was Mark Reynolds, an old, long-absent friend of my late husband. Mark and David had gone to university together decades earlier. They had built dreams side by side, traveled together, celebrated milestones I had only ever heard about in fragments over dinners and late-night talks. I hadn't seen Mark in more than 10 years. Our contact had dwindled to polite holiday cards and the occasional email, brief digital nods across an ocean of time. Earlier that day, Mark had called, his voice just a little hesitant, asking if he might stop by while driving through Virginia. I imagined a brief meeting at a cafe, a handshake, perhaps a bittersweet exchange of memories. But then he explained that every hotel nearby was full because of the annual wine festival. Could he stay the night? He asked softly. My first instinct was to hesitate, to guard the solitude I had built like a fortress. But then I reminded myself I had a guest room. It was innocent, harmless. Mark was, after all, a friend, and friends sometimes pass through your life needing shelter. When I opened the door, he carried not just the scent of rain, but something else too. An echo of a memory I couldn't quite place. Something warm, steady, and familiar. His once dark hair was now streaked with silver, his beard neatly trimmed. But his smile, oh, his smile. It was the same easy, disarming smile that had always made people feel at ease. For a moment, I was transported back to a much younger version of myself. To days filled with laughter and possibility. We began with small talk in the foyer, our voices a little tentative at first, but soon drifted into the kitchen. I brewed tea the way I always do, but Mark, with a half smile, splashed a touch of whiskey into his mug. Hours melted away as we sat together at the kitchen island, our words weaving through old stories, bursts of laughter, and quiet pauses that felt surprisingly comfortable. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't forced. It was the kind of unhurried, soul-filling conversation I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. At one point, in the midst of recalling some long-ago story about David, Mark reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. My breath caught. My skin flushed. I didn't lean in, but I didn't pull away either. It was one of those small, electric moments that hangs in the air waiting for an answer neither person is ready to give. By 11 p.m., I showed him to the guest room. Fresh linens, a soft lamp by the window, everything arranged perfectly ordinary. But the look he gave me as I closed the door lingered, gentle and searching. I returned to my own room with my heart restless, alive with an energy I hadn't felt in years. I must have fallen asleep, but something stirred me awake around midnight. Maybe it was the branches tapping against the window. Maybe it was the quiet, deliberate footsteps moving softly down the hallway. Curiosity tugged at me, and before I could talk myself out of it, I stepped into the hall. A faint golden glow spilled from beneath the guest room door. Candlelight, flickering like a secret. My pulse quickened. I pushed the door open gently. There was Mark, sitting on the edge of the bed, the flame of a single candle throwing soft shadows across his face. He looked up, startled at first, then softened. "I couldn't sleep," he said quietly. I stepped in, the floor cool beneath my bare feet. "Too many thoughts?" I asked. He nodded, eyes dropping briefly before meeting mine again. "Just being here. It brings back David, the old days, your laugh." His voice cracked slightly. Then, almost whispering, he added, "And I'm sorry if I crossed a line earlier. With your hair. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." I moved closer, my heart racing. "You didn't." That's when he reached for my hand. His touch was warm, steady, and unexpectedly tender. Something inside me shifted, as though loneliness, my familiar companion for so many years, had suddenly become optional. We sat side by side on the edge of the bed. The candlelight wrapped around us like a soft blanket, as though time itself had slowed. Mark spoke truths I never knew, how his marriage had ended quietly a decade ago, how he sometimes longed for the version of himself that used to dream bigger. In turn, I told him my truths. The hollow years after David's passing, the ache of silence in a house too big for one, the fear that perhaps I had already lived my last beginning. He listened. Really listened, and I realized how rare that had become. Eventually, we shifted against the headboard, our shoulders brushing, our hands still linked. At one point, I rested my head on his shoulder, and he lowered his cheek to my hair. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like a ghost in my own life. I felt alive. We talked until dawn began softening the windows, painting the sky pale gray. At the threshold of my room, just before he returned to the guest room, he squeezed my hand. "Thank you for letting me in tonight," he said. And I knew he wasn't only talking about the house. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen, hair damp from his shower, looking unexpectedly younger in a simple t-shirt. He smiled at me, and for a heartbeat, it felt as though the years between us had folded in half. We spent the day together tending my overgrown garden, swapping stories, and laughing more than I thought possible. That afternoon, he admitted quietly, "I don't want to leave just yet." My heart thudded, and I told him it wouldn't be strange if he stayed, because by then, I knew I didn't want him to go either. That evening as the sun set, painting the sky with streaks of gold and rose, we sat on the porch with glasses of wine. I confessed that I used to talk to David during sunsets, telling him about my day, about the little things he'd missed. Mark didn't judge. He didn't interrupt. He simply reached for my hand and said softly, "There's always room for something new." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. Later that night, when he asked quietly, "Where would you like me tonight?" I took a deep breath and whispered, "With me." We didn't rush. We didn't pretend to be people we weren't. We shared space, shared warmth, shared the kind of closeness that doesn't need fireworks to feel profound. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about allowing the present to matter. The next morning, he made breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee. Moving about my kitchen as though he'd always belonged there. And as I watched him, I realized something simple but life-changing. Love doesn't follow a timeline. Sometimes it circles back, sometimes it waits for years, and sometimes it shows up during a rainstorm, asks to stay the night, and quietly rearranges everything you thought you knew. Mark left 2 days later, but not before promising to return, and I promised myself something even more important. Not to close the door again. Not to him. Not to life. Not to love, because at 61, I finally understood what I had spent years denying. Beginnings don't have an age limit.